Welcome to The Final Curtain Never Closes, presented by the National Museum of Funeral History. I'm your host, Genevieve Keeney-Vasquez, President and CEO of the museum. If you find value in these conversations, I invite you to support the show by sharing this episode, subscribing on Apple and YouTube. Now let us begin. Today I have a great guest with me. He's become a lifelong friend. We've worked very closely together here at the museum. From time to time, I'd love to welcome Bob Arrington, who is a spokesperson for the National Funeral Directors Association, otherwise known as NFDA, and is also the past president of the association, and currently sits on the board for the National Museum of Funeral History. Bob, welcome, and thanks for joining.
Thank you, Genevieve. Anytime I can have conversation with you is a good day for me.
Oh, thanks.
And as the museum says, any day above ground is a good day, especially visiting with you. So I look forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for being willing. And I understand that you had listened to a couple of the past podcasts.
Yes.
And because of you listening to the podcast, it kind of like got your wheels turning and said, there's more that we can talk about. There's more that we can elaborate on and really try to bring more information to our listeners to help them through some of life's most difficult times, correct?
Right. Exactly right.
One of the things that you're like an advocate for, right, is really helping people with these end-of-life decisions. Can you elaborate more on those end-of-life decisions that you help people through?
Yeah, because what I have learned over my career, if that's the word, of helping people is just the fact that they don't know what they don't know. And with the 150 or so decisions that's got to be made once the death has occurred to either plan for a funeral service or just plan for life going forward. As I say, people don't call us to bury the dead. Now, yes, that's what we do, but they call us to help them start their grief journey that their life will never, ever be the same again, whether it's a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a child, a co-worker. So anything we can do to plan for that is nothing but good for everybody concerned. I mean, we plan for all kinds of life events, weddings or births or whatever for months and months and months. And then the most significant life event is the end of life, and we try to do it within 24 hours. So people who just don't understand the importance of being able to sit, think through it in a non-emotional state. So I've seen it both ways, and there's no question the folks that have pre-planned and thought through the process, and the death may not occur for 10 years, but the fact that they're planning for that inevitable act helps the family so much more than they ever could dream about.
Yeah. And, when I'm sitting here listening to you about that, and I unfortunately have been, experienced death a few times in my own life as well, is that, people get so excited to plan for a wedding. These are events that you get excited for and you're hopeful for, and it's something you want to get engaged in. And when you think about planning for your death, there's no excitement there at all, right? There's no hope there anymore either. So there's this whole new set of emotions that encompass just even the thought of planning for your death. And nobody wants to do that because obviously to plan for your death means that you're, giving into the fact that I'm going to die. And a lot of people do not like to think of life in that way. It's just the psychological human nature, right? And we're born to survive. We have the survival instinct. So if our innate instinct is to survive and stay alive, why do I want to start thinking about my death?
That's right. But it's like we say, it's going to happen to all of us. Of course, I know I'm in funeral service. I've got a file for Judy and I, and, I'll update it every 6 months or so. One, I've buried like 3 of my pallbearers. So that changes. Or I get mad at one of them and I don't want them being a pallbearer. So, but it's the process that I hope I live a long time, but I want people to at least take time to remember and celebrate what took place. So many of the people that have grief issues are those that do something and they don't have a celebration, they don't have a memorialization. And as I encourage people, you don't have to do it here at the funeral home. You don't even have to do it in a church. Just if you do it in your backyard or do it at the river
Mhm.
house, but pause somewhere and celebrate this person that lived 86 years and had 2 kids and has got 7 grandkids, that life did happen and that life had influence over those that are the family now, carrying his or her legacy forward. So it's such an important part of the grief process that people don't realize that they think, well, I don't want to even deal with it. And then they wake up 2 or 3 weeks from now and they go, I think my mother died. So it's an important
Mhm.
part of life, is having that life celebration, funeral service, memorial service that needs to happen for the family to properly start their grief journey.
And there's really no timeline when that celebration of life happens. Is that correct?
That's
Um,
correct. Yeah, that's correct.
So, I remember distinctly I had a patient that I cared for in the VA hospital, and I remember him passing away, and the family had him cremated, and they were asking me, what could they do as far as, remembering him, because I didn't have a lot of money. And I did distinctly tell him, have a beautiful service at your house. And he loved gardening. So,
Okay.
have a memorial service in his garden, in
That's
his
right.
backyard. And that's exactly what they did. They took his urn and they put it in his garden. And they had a bunch of friends over. They just made like a nice little potlucks gathering and brought everyone together. And people just stood around, told stories, and they actually went into his garden and smelled his flowers and took some of his flowers. And so it was a really nice celebration of his
Oh,
life. Just kind of being in what he loved so much.
and that's the personal part of being able to do that. And I will say, cremation over the years has helped create celebration of life, focused, personalized services. Yes, when we had a funeral, a burial back 20 years ago, it was basically song, scripture, prayer, song, message, funeral, cemetery, and it was all.
Mm-hmm.
But when cremation came along, and there wasn't a casket or a body present, more and more people wanted to do something personalized. I want to talk about it. I want videos. I want people to remember the way and what he did in his garden or in his river house or where he played golf or went duck hunting. So cremation has expanded that, but now people that are having traditional funeral burials are getting into that personalization and celebration as well. So that is what it's all about. We'll sit with families in a pre-planning situation, and the husband or the father will say, just cremate me and throw me in a ditch. I don't need anything. And if I'm really close to them, I say, John, newsflash, it's not about you. It's what they need. We're going to honor,
Exactly.
but what they do is what they need, not what you want them to do that they may not need. So it's all about you and honoring you, but what is needed in the process is all about your wife and your 2 daughters. So that's what sometimes we get confused is, well, daddy didn't want us to do that. Well, okay, but what do you
Mm-hmm.
need? So we
Exactly.
sometimes get confused and let the deceased control the emotions and the process of what the family needs to start that journey.
Yeah, and I think that's important for people to also understand that, yes, you want to honor the wishes of your
Mm-hmm.
loved one, that they may have spoken to you on their deathbed or maybe put it in their will. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that they need to also come to the table with what will bring them comfort and allow them to move forward through this grief process, through this loss, and be able to start functioning a normal, healthy life again.
In which that pre-planning process helps people to talk that out. Okay, Dad, yeah,
Say
you
that three
want
times
to,
fast, Bob.
yeah, say that and backwards. So yes,
Backwards, yeah.
Dad, I understand you want to be cremated, but we want to have a funeral. So now,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, they have the ceremonial rental type caskets that you can have the body present, have the funeral, and cremation mainly takes the place of the burial. So you're able to have those conversations that, all right, Dad, we're going to honor your wishes, we're going to cremate you, and we're going to scatter you over your favorite fishing hole. We're going to do that. But what we need is we need a visitation and a funeral. So the pre-planning process allows that to happen. Otherwise, there's a death that happens and the family comes in the next morning. Daddy wanted to be cremated. Well, do you want to have the service before or after? Oh, Daddy just wanted to be cremated. Well, you can't have that conversation. So they're trying to honor what he has said, and sometimes it's a detriment to what they need in the process.
We are back to the conversation in just a moment. First, I invite you to support the show by sharing this episode, subscribing on Apple and YouTube, and by visiting or donating to the National Museum of Funeral History at nmfh.org. Your support keeps these conversations going and helps us remind one another that any day above ground is a good one.
Very true. And speaking of a rental casket, for our listeners who don't understand what a rental casket is, it's basically an outer container. And the museum now has, I don't know if you had a chance to see it, we did install some nice corner cutaways of what a rental casket looks like and how it functions and what its purpose is. Basically, it is an outer container, kind of like an outline, if you will, of a casket. It's got the four sides and the lid. And then basically what you do is you kind of roll the alternative container that the deceased is in, that's going to be cremated in. And so it looks like they're having a casket for the funeral. Again, a funeral is when the body's present. And then you have the funeral, and then they take the alternative container out from the shell, if you will, and cremate the loved one. And then the shell of that casket now, again, has not had a deceased person in it. So I don't want people to think that they're recycling the caskets. They're not. They're just making it a very aesthetically appearing service container for the service for your loved one. Yeah.
The cardboard cremation container that the body's actually laying in, and the interiors and all that, is what the end of the casket folds down, and that container with the body in it comes out, and then a new one is put in there for the next deceased. But the wooden, usually their wooden shell is reusable, and it's about half the cost. But that way you're able to honor a cremation, but yet the family wants to have a traditional viewing and funeral service.
Exactly. I actually had that from my mother. It was actually very beautiful. It looked, you couldn't even tell the difference at all. I mean, my sister had a full casket. We cremated her with her casket and all. Whereas, my mother had the rental casket with the cardboard box, otherwise known as the alternative container, kind of slipped in, and that's what she was cremated with. So, yeah.
Again, all
different
of these
times.
Conversations can happen in the pre-planning time period. It's hard to do that once the death occurred last night, but if you're able to sit down in a pre-planning mode, you're able to show people, and they go, yeah, that's really what I want. Where if the death occurred last night and they've been up 10 or 12, 15 hours, it's hard for them to process some things just because they're mentally unstable. So again, the pre-planning, because there's so many options, and especially cremation and burial now. You've got burial, entombment, mausoleums, all of that with the many options. Pre-planning is the best way to sit down and think through.
Yeah, and for people that, have never experienced a death, if you're listening, you've never experienced a death, or you've never experienced a death where you are tasked with sitting with the funeral director and making those decisions and planning everything out. If you've never been down that road yet in your life, you'll never understand. I'm a funeral director. I'm in the profession. I eat, live, breathe it. But I can tell you right now, when it came to my mother's death and sitting across the desk from the funeral director, like you said, my mental capacity was not there. I could not really make the sound decisions that need to be made. There were comments that were made to me or questions that were asked, and I had to look left or right to my daughters and say, what did he say? What does he want? Because I was so,
right.
I was consumed with my grief.
Yes.
Rightfully
right.
so. So
and
I think that's,
processes are just running into each other. So it's hard.
Exactly. And you want to make all the right decisions. And I wanted to make all the right decisions for my mother, and being a funeral director, I think I had just, a little bit of higher standards and expectations that, as people came to visit, that I had to make sure everything was right. And so I really kind of already knew what I wanted from my mom and how it was going to be. So I kind of already pre-planned it in my head. But, when it did happen, I can tell you I was floundering like a fish out of water.
Well, and some of
So,
the worst conversations or uncomfortable that I've had is like, especially in a sudden, unexpected, tragic death. And we'll say
mm-hmm,
the wife and the two kids come in and they said, I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he wanted to go back to Arkansas and be buried with his parents. I don't know if he wanted to be cremated. So here's what's happening. You've got a grief-stricken family, and now they're trying to get inside the mind of the deceased person to try to figure out what he would have wanted. To where, as I
mm-hmm,
encourage people, at least talk about it. If you don't want to put pen
right.
to paper and finalize it, at least talk about it. But people struggle of trying to figure out what he would have wanted because they didn't want to talk about it. So that's just
Mm-hmm.
undue emotion and stress onto your family, which becomes kind of a selfish act that, yeah, maybe you don't want to go fill out in your information sheet and pick out your casket, but at least tell people, yes, I want to have a funeral. I want to be carried back to Little Rock and buried next to Mother and Daddy and my brother. At least give
Mm-hmm.
people some kind of guidance to where they don't have to try to figure out what the deceased would have wanted.
Yeah, exactly. And you talked about the fact that you have 24 to 48 hours to make all these decisions, and it's about 150 questions. And you talked about some of them already, like where do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated or buried? And so what are some of the other questions or some of the big questions that you feel end of life planning can help people uh, get answered ahead of time, or if they're going to talk about the hard subject of death? What are some of the hard questions you feel, or some of the most important questions that should be talked about?
Well, what we've just kind of mentioned is, you want to be buried or cremated. What's the final resting place, whether it be of your cremated remains or where you want to be buried? We'll have families come in and say, well, Daddy wants to be cremated. And say, okay, what about a service? Well, I don't know. Okay, so what's his final resting place going to be as far as like a container? Well, they look at you like, he just wanted to be cremated. Well, okay, we're gonna provide you some cremated remains. Now, what's your plan? What are you going to do with them? Because what
Hmm.
that decision is depends on what type of container, if at all, do you need. If it's going to possibly scatter over his favorite fishing hole, you may not need a $400 urn. If he's going to go into a mausoleum or to be buried, you may not need an urn at all. If you're going to keep him in the library and the office where he worked, then you might want a different type. So all of those things you need to think through, and most people that they haven't thought through it, they can't answer that question at the time they're making arrangements, which is okay,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just one of those steps that, well, we hadn't really thought about that pre-planning could have brought all of that out. And then, if you're going to be buried, who you want your pallbearers to be. If you want like a eulogy and you want one of your college buddies to speak, who do you want that to be? Do you want one of your grandkids to speak? If you do, who do you want that to be? What kind of flowers do you want? So and what kind of casket? What kind of vault? There's just items that's got to be finalized that you don't think about until you start the process. Now, rememberingalife.com is on the website, but they have funeral planning conversation cards. There's 50 of them
Hmm.
that will walk you through those kind of questions, just like we have just talked about, which helps you understand, but you would never think about what those questions would be. Like, do
Pull
you
me a
want
card, Bob. Yeah, pull
here?
me out a card and ask me the question. Let me
All
see
right.
what I'm going to be faced with.
How do you want people to feel when they leave your funeral or memorial service? And do you want any
Oh,
particular food or beverage served to the guests?
wow. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
definitely. If I could answer that question, I would want them to feel enlightened, happy. I want them to leave with great memories.
yeah.
And as far as food, Mexican food.
There you go. See, now that's personalization about Genevieve. And have you discussed your
Hmm.
wishes with family and friends? That's probably one of the most. It's like those unexpected deaths that lady and her husband had never even talked about it. So it's just,
Hmm.
I encourage people, if you don't want to come pre-plan your funeral, at least talk about what you want with somebody. And
It's interesting. Like you said, have I talked about it with my family? When I was in the military, they make you do a will. They make you literally have to go through this. I want to call it like a round robin, right? You got all these stations you got to go to. You got to get your health. You got to go to legal and get your finances in order. You got to go to get your will done and everything. And they make you get all this stuff done because you never know when you're going to get called up to go to war. And then like every 6 months to a year, you have to go through and you have to update all of that. So
yeah,
you asked me the question if I discussed this stuff with my family. My answer is yes. But do
yeah.
you know when I last discussed it? It was about 25 years ago.
I was going to say probably then. Yeah,
Yeah,
probably.
exactly. So it's a lot has
Now,
changed.
and now you may have a different wish. What you were going to do
True.
25 years ago, you may or may not going to do the exact same thing. More than likely, you've changed your thoughts on some of it. But
Hmm.
you know, to the point of the military, not ever knowing when you're going to get called up. In all honesty, we don't know when we're going to get called up. So
Very true.
planning, thinking about that is so important. Not necessarily as much for you, me, the person. It is for my wife, kids, brother, that's got to have it laid in their lap when something happens. So, not having those conversations, as we call it, is having the talk of a lifetime. Not having those conversations becomes pretty selfish. That you'll say, somebody else will take care of that. Well, you shouldn't leave that in somebody else's lap.
Another thing that I've heard some people say is, "Oh, I don't want to plan because if I plan, that means I'm going to die."
Well, you're going to die, whether you plan it or not.
Yeah.
So,
Right,
I
but I
mean,
think some people when if they
yeah,
put it in the universe, then it's going to happen sooner rather than later, right?
if I
So I
write it
think that
down,
that's
yeah, if I write it down and you put it in a file and stick it in your pre-arrangement filing cabinet, then my number is going to be called. Yeah, I agree. I've heard
exactly,
that too.
yeah,
I don't want to talk
right.
about it because I
So
don't want it to happen.
right. So how can we help dispel those beliefs or that thinking to try and get people to overcome that?
Well, usually we've had some of those conversations that the wife wants to do it because she's more than likely going to end up doing it, and the husband just says, "I'm not going. I'm not going to do it." So she comes and just does it because she's going to end up.
Mm,
I'm going to end up having to do it anyway. So I'm going to come fill out the paperwork. I'm going to pick out the casket. I'm going to pick out the vault. I'm going to go ahead and put down what I would be doing if something happened to him last night. So she says, okay, I'm getting it done. And if he don't want to come, I'm going to do it because I'm going to have to do it anyway. So a lot of
that's
times it gets done without him wanting to do it anyway.
so. Just go ahead and do it
Just go ahead and do it.
regardless.
She
Yeah,
knows that if something happened to him, she's going to have to do it, and she'd much rather it be in the filing cabinet than her having to sit down the next morning and do it then, just because he was selfish and wouldn't do it with her. Some people you're not going to change, that they're just not going to do it, but one spouse or the other, or we've even had children, especially if one parent had died and they went through that, and they want mom or dad, whichever one is surviving, to come do it, and they don't, then one of the children are just going to do it. So we're going to get it
mm,
done to where we don't have to do it again in 3 years or whatever. So some people just takes the initiative and says, okay, I've asked them 3 times. If they're not coming, then they're going to leave it up to me. So if it's left up to me, I'm going to do it now.
that's some interesting information to just go ahead and do it. Let's talk about somebody who doesn't have anybody to do it.
Well, and we had one of a service like that about 3 or 4 months ago. You can pick an agent. Obviously, it's somewhat like a power of attorney, but as we know, a power of attorney ceases at death unless you give them the authority and right of disposition. Then they can do that if they're not in the order of right of disposition authority. So again, it takes some pre-planning. You've got to know, okay, if something happens to me, I don't have anybody. I don't have a sibling. I don't have anybody. So you've got to pre-plan to give somebody that authority. And most of the time, in those cases that we've had, the person comes in and makes their own funeral arrangements, but gives Sally or Fred or whoever the authority to act as that agent to sign the cemetery paperwork or do whatever. But again, that is a tremendous situation that's got to be pre-planned. Because otherwise, you get tied up in the courts. You've got to get a court order to be able to do anything. So that no doubt extends all of the difficulties and the timeline if there's nobody planned to be able to handle the right of disposition.
So everything you've been talking about, as far as obviously pre-planning with your family, is done at the funeral home. But I don't have any family, and I need to designate somebody to take care of me after I'm gone. Do I have to have a lawyer involved, or can all of this be taken care of at the funeral home?
It can be your neighbor. Yeah, the funeral director can do just a simple, I hereby, Bob Arrington, appoint Fred Jones to be my agent and make my final disposition decisions, period. I mean, it can be
So you can
that
just write
simple.
it down on a piece of paper, put it on file
Have
with
it
your local funeral
notarized,
director.
and yeah, that it just appoint. It doesn't have to be a lawyer involved. It's just got to be somebody appointed by we'll call it at this time, the deceased, that has the right.
I'm sorry, does that form have to be notarized?
Yeah, it would have to be
Yes,
notarized
okay.
by the deceased person that's given the authority to the agent.
Okay. So then I could basically, in this scenario, I can go with my neighbor, say I'm going to appoint my neighbor to be my person to speak on my behalf and take care of my remains after I've died.
Right.
Go to my local bank with my neighbor, have them notarize this statement that I wrote on a piece of paper, designating him, and then do I give that copy to him, or do I need to bring it to my local funeral director, or do I put it in a file?
Both. It needs to definitely be with the funeral director. The funeral director needs the original copy, so when something happens and they pull that file 2 years from now, okay, here's where Genevieve on March the 10th of 2027 or whatever appointed Fred Jones. So that's who the funeral home would contact.
Okay. So now can I go and start a file with my local funeral home with what I would consider important documents without actually starting any financial obligations towards my funeral?
Absolutely. We have a lot of what we call unfunded prearrangements that people come in and give us the vital statistics that we need for the death certificate and Social Security forms for the papers we have to deal with. It's basically its name, Social Security number, mother and father's name, all those vital statistics that's put in a file. Some people, they'll go ahead and pick out a casket and a vault, and they'll put down who they want to speak, what music they want. They'll do the whole thing. They just don't fund it because they've got either a life insurance policy designated to fund it, or they've got cash in a CD designated. So there's many people that do unfunded prearrangements because just because you prearrange doesn't mean you have to pay for it. Now, some people want to go ahead and pay for it. That way, the whole process is done. The price is frozen. In other words, if you paid for 2026 services and the death occurred in 2036, the family doesn't pay any more money, even though during that 10 years the funeral prices have increased. But once you've paid for it, there is no other additional charges. So some people want to do that, others don't. It's all about personal situation and what's best personally, pay for it or not. But still, the information's not going to change. Mother and daddy's name's not changing, Social Security number's not changing. So they want to do as much as they can, put this document in the file, And then that way, basically, all that's got to happen is set a funeral time.
Let's say I go to my local funeral home and I initiate an unpaid file with you. And then things happen in my life, 10 years down the road, things happen and I move to a whole nother state. Can I come in and say, hey, I'm moving. Can I take my file with me to a local funeral home there?
Absolutely. And even if let's say you funded it with Arrington Funeral Directors and in 10 years you moved to Florida to retire and something happened, that's your money. So like ours, we put with a pre-need insurance company. So if ABC Funeral Home in Miami, Florida actually serviced your funeral, the pre-need insurance company where your money was placed would pay that funeral home in Florida. Now, they may not guarantee the prices like we did, but that money would transfer to any funeral home that serves your family and provides your service. So they are transferable. It's like if somebody died in Illinois and they moved here and a funeral home in Illinois guaranteed the prices 10 years ago. I may not can guarantee those prices, but that money is obviously good here that you paid 10 years ago. So it is transferable.
Transferable with no guarantee on cost.
Correct.
Good information to know. That is a wealth of knowledge. So, when I'm sitting here talking, you and I are both funeral directors. So, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to pre-plan. It's, time consuming, or I don't have any money right now. So as you guys can see, you don't have to have money to pre-plan. End of life decisions are very important. There are a lot of decisions to be made in a very short amount of time. And at the end of the day, you're helping the funeral director help your family and help you. That's all it is. We're just saying, that you're going to need our services one day. You're going to need us to help you and help your family. That is set in stone.
Well, and somebody is going to give the funeral director this information. It's either going to be before the death or after. The information is not going to change. The need is there. So you can either do it now or you can wait 10 years or 7 years or whenever the death occurs and have to come up with all that information in a matter of an hour or two. So information is going to be needed at some point, and you can either do it ahead of time or wait till you have to do it. Exactly.
So you talked about the cards. Those cards are really good conversational starters to try to help start getting your mind thinking about the things that you want. Are there maybe journals or a website or something that might have the form or a way that I can obtain the forms to start filling it all out?
I would say
in the comfort of my home.
Yes, I would say you could go. I know you could, for Arrington Funeral Director's website, but I would say, a funeral home, say in Houston, that you would choose, or somebody in Tulsa. More than likely, there's a pre-planning tab on that funeral home website that you can send that information digitally to the funeral home. Then, should you want to follow up with the funeral home and pick out a casket and pay for it. But the information that we're talking about, legal name, social security number, mother, father's name, you can do that digitally on most every funeral home website anywhere.
And if I can't do it digitally or don't want to do it digitally because I don't want to put that information in a digital format, can I print out a form and write it all down and then hand carry it down to my local funeral director?
Right. You could probably print that form out blank. I know we have our information sheet that we take in a digital format that we can just email it to the family, and like you say, they can print and fill it out by hand and bring it to us.
So I think it's wise, or a really good takeaway. I think in our podcast here today, Bob, is your local funeral director is your friend.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important that if you don't feel comfortable walking into your local funeral home, at least call them and say, hey, I want to start kicking around the idea of what it would look like for my funeral, or I want to start planning for my parents' funeral. I know it's too hard for them right now, but I really kind of want to get the ball rolling. Your funeral director is your friend, and it's better to make friends before you have to.
best step you could take. One is decide on who you want to help you through the process. And like Genevieve said, reach out and say, I'd at least want to fill out the vital statistic information and get that put in a file to at least start my thought process now and not when I have to.
And you also made something very important fact, or something that you pointed out early on in the conversation, was that you yourself had to make changes. So changes can be made along the way as life changes.
Yeah. And we'll have people that'll come in here every so often, and they've heard a new song, and they'll bring a CD and say, hey, put this in my file. Or they're liable to call and say, hey, instead of having the funeral at the church, I think I'd rather have it at the funeral home because I like the feeling. So, yes, it becomes a work in process that many times people make adjustments to along the way.
Oh, that's really good to know. That things are final. The most constant thing in life is change, and you can change. You can change your funeral plan along the way as life sees fit. Yeah, so that's amazing. So
anytime, especially on the music side.
I'm pretty sure I would do the same.
And the pallbearer side. So yes, it changes as your thoughts change, and you see something that you might like you didn't know about 2 years ago. But yes, I kind of look at it different because I'm in it, but I want a really, really good funeral. So that's what I'm kind of planning for. And, in all honesty, we all would like to have a nice remembrance of ourselves, whether we want to admit it or we say, don't pay any attention to me. But deep down, we hope we've had some kind of impact and influence on people that they will at least take 30 or 45 minutes to remember.
Yeah, I always say it is your final party. It's your going away party. And what do you want it to look like? How do you want it to speak about you? And no matter how long that life was lived, whether it's 2 minutes or it's 100 years,
that's right,
anytime in between, it all deserves to be recognized. So talk about again where some of these resources might lie for our listeners to, one, get the cards, the deck of cards that you talked about, get some of the forms.
It's called Remembering a Life, and they've got like 3 to 4 maybe packs of cards. They've got a lot of resources. They've got some brochures and booklets, but that's a website from the National Funeral Directors Association that's really directed at remembering a life, whether it be pre-planning, during. They even have some grief journey cards that are used following the funeral to help people through that grief journey, as I mentioned before. But that would be the first place I would go, is Remembering a Life. And then also there's a lot of funeral homes. I know we have some resources, and a lot of funeral homes do, but I do know Remembering a Life has a multitude of resources for remembering a life.
So as you can see, that the National Funeral Directors Association is not just for the funeral directors and the profession. It's also resources for our customers, our clients, the people who need this information, that really we're just a pass through, right? We're a pass through of the information. And I always say that information is the best thing that you could have during a time where you have absolutely no knowledge or no control over. So do you have any parting words or any inspirational, things that you want to leave the listeners that you feel is something that they should walk away with?
Really, just to wrap up what we've talked about, every life deserves to be celebrated, no matter, like you say, what that life involved, because it's affected, if nobody else, it affected the family in a great, great way. And their life will never be the same again with that empty chair, as we call it. But take the time. You need it. You may not know you need it, but you need to pause and celebrate that life that was an influence to you for ever how many years it was. So that's the best advice I can give you, is pause and celebrate the life and take the time to plan for that. Not just let it happen, plan for it because of the life that was lived.
Very well said, Bob. I couldn't have said it any better, but you're very right. And when you were talking just now, and you were talking about how important it is to take that moment and pause, I immediately went back to my mom's funeral, and I was enjoying the memories of her funeral, that I did take that pause. And that pause now has left me great memories.
And memories are forever. You'll always remember that. And like I say, a lot of people that don't go through that, within a couple of weeks, they start having grief issues because they didn't pause. And so
Yes.
it's needed more than you can ever say. And it's a part of the grief process that you need to pause and do that.
I think it's just about as needed as learning how to walk before you run.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's healthy to do that for the grief process.
exactly. Well, Bob, I could talk to you for...
I say it takes some time, some talk, and some tears to get over and get through that grief journey. So, but you've got to let that process happen. You can't try to say, well, I'm not going there. I'm not going to do that. Yeah, you're going to go there. That's a matter. Do you go there in a comfortable, healthy way, or do you try to just act like those 86 years of your mother or father didn't exist? So you're going to go through that, and you need to do it in a healthy way.
Very true. And pre-planning helps that process. Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, Bob, I could talk to you for hours about this. There's so much to be learned and said. And I hope that the listeners, if you guys have any questions about some of the things that Bob and I talked about here on the podcast, feel free to reach out to the museum at contact@nmfh.org or reach out to Bob. Bob, please tell them how they can reach out to you if they have questions directly for you.
You can go to arringtonfuneraldirectors.com, or my personal email is bob@arringtonfuneral.com. So feel free to reach out. And if you reach out to the museum and it's a question for me, Genevieve will send it over to me. But feel free at any time to reach out to either one of us.
Yes, we want to be a resource for all of our listeners going through or planning or knowing that one day it will happen. We are here for you. Bob, thank you so much for joining me, and look forward to seeing you here in a couple months.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining this episode of The Final Curtain Never Closes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please spread the word by sharing it from your favorite podcast app. And be sure to plan your visit, or you can plan a virtual tour at nmfh.org. We have 2 different levels for the virtual tour. We have an individual one for a 48-hour time span in which you can peruse the museum, or you can take the annual membership, which will allow you a 365-day tour of the museum at your leisure. And remember, any day above ground is a good one.